Hello everyone. Now this is the final video of this series, and I'd like it to be a sort of a bridge to the next series where we will begin an examination of the teachings of the writers of the so-called New Testament or the Christian Greek scriptures and analyze really how they compare with the teachings of Jesus in the gospel accounts. So before we cross the bridge to the next series, let's make sure we fully understand what Jesus meant when in his Sermon on the Mount he stated, Matthew 5 and verse 17. Let's read that together. Do not think I came to abolish the law or the prophets. I came not to abolish them, but to fulfill them. So, what did Jesus mean when using the words abolish and fulfill? Now, we're going to get a little bit sort of technical here because it is important that we don't lose anything in the meaning of those words in our translations. Of course, we are reading everything in English. That's what we do, don't we? Now, there is a Gospel of Matthew in Hebrew, and which is known as the Shem Tov manuscript. And in Matthew 5 and verse 17, the words for abolish and fulfill just help us to understand what those words originally meant in the context of Matthew 5. The word used for abolish is often translated as destroy or dissolve. In the context of Hebrews, for example, discussing the law or commandments, it meant really to abolish or nullify, getting rid of it, really. That's basically what the Hebrew word meant. And for fulfill, again, it meant to fill or to complete. Now, this would align with the concept of fulfilling the law or the prophetic writings by completing or bringing them to their intended fullness. And of course, these words would carry similar meanings in Greek. In the canonical Matthew, which of course we know and we read in English, the Greek was to abolish or destroy, and the word for fulfill, the Greek word for fulfill, plerou, was to complete. But you can see that in the Hebrew, we get this more complete understanding of what was meant by that. So now that we've gone through that little bit of important translation, we're going to return to this early in the next series. So keep this in mind. It's important to understand these words because we're going to return to it. Now let's just continue. Note, Jesus refers to both the law and the prophets. Now, in the last video, we showed that whenever he referenced the law, he invariably used the Mosaic law as we read from the book of Deuteronomy. Now, what about the prophets? Well, we have seen Jesus quoting from the prophets, but always in particular in connection with the temple sacrificial arrangement. So what I've done is provide a little table by way of Jesus referring to these prophets and the context of them. So we're going to put this little table up in the credits so that you could have a look at them and read the scripture references and see how Jesus used the scriptures from Hebrew, refer to them in the books in the Gospels, and see how he applied them. So let's just take, for example, the Matthew 9 and verses 13 and then and then 12 in verse 7, where he says, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. Now, used twice by Jesus. What was he doing? He was being critical of the Pharisees' lack of compassion. And that's what he was doing. He was quoting from Hosea 6 and verse 6. Now, get these scriptures out and read it for yourselves. Absorb the full meaning of what Jesus was actually doing when he quoted from these prophets. My house shall be called a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of robbers. You know, the temple cleansing arrangements he took part in, or he instigated. And of course, we find Matthew 21 and verse 13 and Mark 11 verse 17, which we covered. What was he quoting from? He was quoting from Isaiah chapter 1 and verse 11 through to 17, especially verse 13. Again, Jesus, he's really criticizing the whole temple arrangement. And how is he doing this? He's referring back to the book of Jeremiah, when he rejects sacrifice, when God is rejecting sacrifice, but looking at obedience as the requirement that he's looking for. Now, Matthew 21 verse 13, John 2:16, he was quoting from Jeremiah chapter 7 verses 21 through to 23, and of course Jeremiah chapter 7 verse 11 as well. Micah chapter 6 and verses 6 through to 8. What is Jesus implying there? What does the Lord require of you? But to act justly, love mercy. And of course, he's contrasting this with all the empty sort of ritual arrangements. And of course, we see this as we go through the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5 through to 7. You know, the Beatitudes as we've come to know them as. Maybe not Jehovah's Witnesses so much, but most of the churches speak of that whole teaching as the Beatitudes, all implied by Jesus. What about Malachi? Malachi chapter 1 verses 10 through to 13, chapter 3 1 to 3. He's condemning polluted offerings and a corrupt priesthood. And he echoes that in his teachings when he's driving out the money changers. We've been through that whole episode, haven't we? Amos, he again, I hate your festivals. Let justice roll like a river. What is Jesus doing? He's condemning all the tithing arrangements, all the particulars of the Levitical law. And what were they doing? They were just neglecting. The main point of it all was they were neglecting justice. And when we go through Luke chapter 11 verse 42, Matthew 23 verse 23, we see that. So let's just ponder for a moment or two and reflect on the foundational information that the scriptures are actually revealing to us, and which we've covered in this first two series. Firstly, Jesus and the prophets, they roundly condemned the sacrificial arrangement in the temple, which was in fact designed as a house of prayer. And secondly, the scriptures clearly show that the ministry of Jesus was just for 1 year, just over 1 year, not the 3.5 years of the theory that Eusebius portrayed, and of course we've come to accept as natural. Everyone accepts 3.5 years. But let's put a nail in that coffin of the 3.5 year ministry. See, when we go to Luke chapter 3 and verses 1 and 2, what does he do? What does Luke here provide? He provides us with specific details about the time when John the Baptist began his ministry, noting, right, the time period. Tiberius Caesar, the Roman emperor, 14 to 37 CE. Pontius Pilate, the prefect of Judea, 26 to 36 CE. Herod Antipas, the tetrarch of Galilee, 4 BCE to 39 CE. Philip, tetrarch of Iturea and Trachonitis, 4 BC to 34 BC. And Lysanias, the tetrarch of Abilene, well, the historical records are a little bit sort of less clear about that. But the point that Luke 3 and verse 2 makes is that it gives us a clear understanding of when John the Baptist started his ministry, and that had to be in the year 29 CE, likely, in fact, the early part of it. Therefore, Jesus likely started his ministry some 6 months later, because we know from the book of Matthew that Jesus was born 6 months after John the Baptist. And of course, he started his ministry when he was about 30 years of age. So this indicates that it is in the latter part of the year 29 CE Jesus began his ministry and was executed in the early part of the spring of 31 CE. Because the scriptures indicate his ministry lasted just over a year and a few months. When was the temple destroyed? In 70 CE, 39 years later. Now, you do the maths for Daniel 9:24 to 27 and see what contortions you have to generate in order to try and make everything fit. Because it does not. You know, it reminds me of the various expectant years that have been proposed for the end of this system, if you like, only to be met with disappointed. And it was starting right there, back there in the 1st century, and all the way through even to this day. And no doubt it's going to continue on. Now, there is one more piece of information we're going to examine briefly, because we shall be returning to it again later in the series. A bit of a heads up, if you like. This takes us towards the bridge I mentioned at the very start of this video. Here's a question. Who have we always been taught was the father of the faith? Well, Abraham, of course. Let's confirm that. Romans chapter 4 and verses 11 and verse 18. Verse 11. And he received the sign of circumcision as a seal of the righteousness that he had by faith, while he was still uncircumcised. So then he is the father of all who believe but are not circumcised, in order that righteousness might be credited to them. In verse 18, against all hope, Abraham in hope believed, and so became the father of many nations, just as he has been told, so shall your offspring be. Quite clear there, isn't it? We're reminded of Abraham's faithful obedience, even to the point of sacrificing his own son Isaac. Now, we'll find that in Genesis chapter 22, and we're going to look at that a little bit more closely in the next series. But you know, here's the strange bit. Jesus never explicitly mentions Isaac being offered by Abraham in the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, or even in John's Gospel. Abraham is mentioned by Jesus. For example, if we go to Luke chapter 16 and verses 19 through to 31, check it out yourself. It's about the parable of Lazarus and the rich man. But Isaac, his near sacrifice, is not mentioned. Again, he is mentioned in John chapter 8 and verses 39 through to 58. He's debating with the Pharisees, but not in connection with Isaac and sacrifice. Check it out. Read it for yourself. In Galatians chapter 4 and verses 22 through to 31, Paul refers to Isaac, but only allegorically, because it's not in connection with the sacrifice. Isaac is mentioned only in connection with the difference between Sarah and Hagar. Read it again and you'll find that it's Isaac, the sacrifice of Isaac, or the intended sacrifice of Isaac, is simply not there. However, in Hebrews chapter 11 and verses 17 through to 19, when you read this, the writer there is directly discussing Abraham's offering up of Isaac. Directly, no question of it. But James, in James chapter 2 and verses 21 through to 24, he uses this same event to support faith being made complete by works. You can see the contrast there. Please check these accounts simply to confirm it to yourself. Remember, it is the scriptures that inform us, not any human being. Don't listen to what I'm saying, in other words. Remember Jesus's heavy counsel to the Pharisees. Go and learn what this means. Matthew 9 and verse 13. And it is here that we're coming to approach the bridge I have referred to, metaphorically speaking, of course. May I invite you to read and ponder something found in the book of Leviticus? Yeah, Leviticus. Now, you'll find it in Leviticus chapter 16, and it is regarding the Day of Atonement. The Day of Atonement. Let's just read that together. Leviticus chapter 16, verses 6 through to 10. Aaron is to present the bull for his sin offering and make atonement for himself and his household. Then he shall take 2 goats and present them before the Lord at the entrance of the tent of meeting. After Aaron has cast lots over the 2 goats, one for the Lord and the other for the scapegoat, he shall present the goat chosen by lot for the Lord and sacrifice it as a sin offering. But the goat chosen by lot as the scapegoat shall be presented alive before the Lord to make atonement by sending it into the wilderness as the scapegoat. Let's just think about that. One is sacrificed to the Lord, and the other, the scapegoat, is sent into the wilderness alive. So let's scroll down to verse 15. Aaron shall then slaughter the goat for the sin offering for the people and bring its blood behind the veil, that's into the most holy. With its blood he must do as he did with the bull's blood and sprinkle it against the mercy seat and in front of it. This is the goat that's been sacrificed for the people. Then, verses 21 and 22. Then he is to lay both hands on the head of the live goat and confess over it all the iniquities and rebellious acts of the Israelites in regard to all their sins. He used to put them on the goat's head and send it away into the wilderness by the hand of a man appointed for the task. The goat will carry on itself all their iniquities into a solitary place, and the man will release it into the wilderness. Now, in the footnote of the Berean Standard Bible, verse 8, this goat, the other one, literally means the goat of Azazel. Azazel. And it's used twice in verse 10 and again in verse 26. The goat for Azazel is sent into the wilderness, carrying all the sins of the people. Now, if you can make time, please, between now and next Wednesday, please read chapter 16 and also 17 if you wish. What conclusions can be drawn from this chapter, which are going to help us to determine what the apostles, by way of Jesus' teachings, carried forward over this metaphorical bridge following Jesus' death? What were the teachings of the apostles, in other words, right, that we're going to be looking at in the new series? So we'll begin coverage next week of that new series. But in the meantime, thank you very much, and we'll see you in the next video.